Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Tech Show. We're on episode 3, and my co-host Levi Lais and myself have something fun in store today. We're going to be talking about our journey in mixed reality and AI. Levi, I believe you're going to interview me. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
It's going to be a blast. Our journeys have been quite intertwined in tech, going back a long time. So I think this will be kind of fun to see what's behind the curtain a little bit and chat about, some of what we've been through over the last few years.
Yeah, we get this excuse to talk every week. So I was thinking it would be kind of fun to go down memory lane a little bit. And the purpose of this show is, one, for you and I to be able to have a conversation every week that our wives are cool with. A nice long chat.
Yep.
And then the other, equally important reason is, the tech show, technology technicians. Like, we both work in tech, and we're both, we have agencies, we have businesses that we own, companies that have been successfully funded. So, I want to sort of circle back to the beginning. I know this is episode 3, but I think we're kind of finding our footing, and I'd like to just maybe lay some groundwork, some history, kind of get some context for who we are and where we're coming from. And so this episode, we're going to focus on you and see if what fun memories pop up as we go through it. But
that sounds great.
It's a pretty basic structure here. I've got 8 questions, and they're really simple, but basically just to kind of walk us through your story and kind of get an idea of
all right, before you start, I have to ask, did you come up with those 8 questions through ChatGPT?
The last question, I was like, okay, here, because I've got the turbo model, right? So I paid for I think I saw you tweeted it actually that you did as well, and I was like, I gotta check that out. So it sounds like if you subscribe, you get access to new features, and so the product that we're making has some dependency on whatever that ends up being, the API for ChatGPT. So I'm hoping that by being a subscriber, maybe there's some early access to that as well. So that's kind of the reason, I guess. I'm okay waiting for it to think, but it does reply faster, which is nice.
Yeah,
that's kind of all you're paying for. Yeah.
I was actually surprised at the price point. I thought it was going to be 40 something bucks, and it came in at 20. I'm like, yeah, that's great. It's worth it.
Yeah. And I was wondering how fast it would be. It's a little bit faster, but it's not a lot faster, So I'm curious to know, I think monetization wise, the free one obviously isn't sustainable. So I think they could just be testing out price points. I don't know what they're doing. I think,
not to get too far off the rabbit trail, but I think for me, the main reason why I've subscribed was more because every other time I tried to access it, it was at capacity and I couldn't access it.
Oh, right? Really?
Yeah. So I would go on, a couple times a day, and then, it'd just be like, oh, sorry, check back later. I'm like, oh, but I need this right now.
Yeah.
So just paying to get access all the time and not have to worry about waiting when it's at capacity. That's huge. Pays for itself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So the last question, I said, what's the best question to ask a podcast guest to close the show? So stick around and find out what ChatGPT
we'll see what ChatGPT came up with for a question.
That's all right. All right. I should have asked for the first question, but so all the way back, give us a pre-tech snippet of who you are, what you're doing. So what were you doing before you got into tech?
Oh man, so it really depends how far back you want to go. But we won't go too far back. I'll say right after I graduated college, I got a job in Colorado, which happens to be where I met you. And you and Julie got a job at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and that was in Golden, Colorado. And I was there for 5 years doing primarily solar energy research, wind power research, like clean energy research. So it's kind of like, okay, where do you draw the line on what's tech and what's not? I think it's widely accepted that's not considered tech. Tech would be like apps and software primarily, or like hardware, like making phones or whatever, right?
Right.
So, you might consider like green tech, but I think for the most part, that's not considered tech. So that's kind of what I was doing before. I was firmly in the energy industry.
Okay. I know when we met, you were, right after we met, you started getting your master's in engineering. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that. Tell me a little bit about sort of, what got you into tech, and like sort of how you educated yourself into a position where you could start, making things in the space.
So 2008 is when I got the job at NREL, is what we called it, National Renewable Energy Lab. 2009 is when you and I met.
Yeah.
And we already had like a passion for tech, or I know you did, because that's how we hit it off, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it was Yelp. Was it Yelp? We were both like,
Yelp.
You use Yelp?
It was Google Voice, Grand Central. Remember that?
Yes. And we each had a Google Voice number, and we were like, you have a voice number too? Like 09 or 10 or whatever it first came out. It was like right away we hit it off with.
Yeah, Google exactly. Voice. And then I went back to get my master's in 2010. However, it was after you and I met, and we started having all sorts of crazy like ideation, like all of our conversations was like about ideas and like things we could make and like all the fun stuff. Like that was, I would say, the beginning of my needle shift at that point. I was like, oh wow, like I really want to be an entrepreneur. I remember there was something you told me, I can't remember like when, but it was pretty early on. You're like, hey, like all these like guys are doing like, they're starting businesses and doing like entrepreneurial stuff in tech. Like if they can do it, why can't we? Like, what's the difference between us? Right. And that made me think like, I think prior to that, I was always like, well, that's like a different type of person and I'm somebody else. But when you said that, I'm like, that's true. Like, what is the difference? Like, we're all just people.
Yeah. Right. And like, we're not old. Like, we're young. We have time,
Right. Yeah.
Why not us?
So I think those, like, every little conversation that we had back in those days, like, shifted the needle, that by the time I went back and got my master's, which I was still working at the time. So a little bit of backstory. So the reason why I decided to get my master's is because for anyone who works at a government lab, there's a very, very thick glass ceiling. Like you have to have this degree to get this promotion. Doesn't matter how, like, you could be working at the lab for like 40 years, but it doesn't matter, right? Like if you're a bachelor's, you get this. If you're a master's, you get this. If you're a PhD, you get that. At least at the government laboratory, that's how it was. So for me at the time, it was kind of a no-brainer. Like, all right, if I am going to advance my career, I need to go back to school because it's something I needed, right, on paper.
Right.
However, by the time
and they subsidized that too, didn't they? Like they were really about education.
Yeah.
That. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. So they paid tuition, which I did have to repay the tuition, but we're not quite there yet.
That's the dark part of the plot.
Yes. But yeah, so by the time I went back, instead of like focusing all my coursework on things that would help my career directly, I was already at the point where like, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be in tech. My degree was in physics, but I'm like, physics is great. It's fun, but I want to do more engineering. So the classes that I took for my master's ended up being like half business and half engineering. It was like the minimal amount of engineering to make sure it was an engineering degree. Yeah. And then all the electives and anything that was like, counted as engineering, it was all like business classes, like patents and economics and business, entrepreneur, like all that stuff.
I remember the patent stuff, like because we were working on little products and like trying to figure out manufacturing, and IP and you were taking the courses. Like that was a really exciting time. I remember that.
So really, I have you to blame. But yeah, it was that was a fun time. So I did that from about 2010, like end of 2010, early 2011 to 2013 was my master's year. And then during those times, you and I would chat a whole bunch. And we had so many ideas, but not enough time and not enough money to like really like push hard on any of them, right?
We found a pretty good rhythm. I remember because the way that I've always talked about our relationship, it's like you're 1 to 70 on like the plausibility scale, right? And then I'm like 30 to 100 on the viability scale. And so like we overlap in the middle where we're both able to, we have that 40% where like we're thinking the same thoughts and we're totally connecting, but then like we're able to bring a significant amount of value individually into, whatever we're doing. And so, that's been a lot of fun. I mean, we, like you said, we were just like iterating through products. It was like, I'm having this idea. Is this feasible? Or is this, plausible? And you're like, yes, it is. Like, and you're engineering a little prototype and then, we're doing all the spreadsheets and I'm going into the viability of it. And it's like, we'd have to charge X. And like, I just
there was
remember.
one like, there was the sun bug, remember, for like watering that. There was the stereo.
Julie talked about that like a month ago. She's like, I need
really?
this product still. It's still not out. Like they still don't have it.
There was those robots that would clean the window, like the gecko robot and all that.
Yeah.
There's like dozens and dozens of them.
Do you remember stereo with an AI?
Yeah.
We got deep into like Qi in like 2012 because we
wireless
thought it was
charging.
This huge thing, and it didn't happen for like 8 years. We're like, well, it's that one. Or a little early. We've been really early on a few different things.
Yeah. It's actually been surprising to hear like most of the ideas you and I talk about within a few years, like it's on the market,
Yeah.
Like Activa Desk, right?
Right. That's actually a product now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember what the company is, but the idea was basically a tray that had legs that you could like stand up at your desk with your keyboard and your mouse. And, because I was working at a call center. That did not exist
back when we were talking, which is
because standing desks
to think
were
about
like
today.
$3,000.
Yeah.
We were like, we could do this for like $150, and then we looked into the tooling and it was like $50,000 for. We're like, well, we don't have that, That was before we really understood what it meant to like raise capital and what all of the implications were there. It was just sort of like we were idea people before we understood business.
It really made me think like that. Even the whole idea about like raising capital and like going out, like it made me realize how much of like one advantage that you and I didn't have. Like we had many advantages, I would say, and everyone has different advantages. But one thing that we didn't have is really anyone in our circle that had walked this path, right? Like relatives, close family members, very close friends, like none of our circles kind of walked this path. So we didn't have that context, right? So it makes me wonder, like, how many young entrepreneurs out there who in their 20s, they go out and raise money and capital, like how many of them already have that context to build on, right? Or people in their circle who are like, hey, this is how you do it, right?
Yeah.
Like you and I, we were like wrestling, like trying to figure this stuff out raw on our own, like books, like you would swallow books.
Yeah, one year I read like, it was like 36 books or something, 3 a month. I bet for somebody who has a day job and like is moonlighting as an entrepreneur, that's a lot of reading, But I just went deep into that. I call it fear learning. It's like I'm afraid of not knowing it, so I just like consume until I feel comfortable, Yeah.
That's
so
that's the hard way to do it, right?
I think that there's a spectrum, right? So it's like on one end you've got somebody did it and they have the money and the resources and, so like you're getting your uncle's funding and you get to start your company and, it's sort of a massive leg up on, you know, being able to get into the space, get into startup culture, get into business building, entrepreneurship, etc. And it's like right about here is like you have no knowledge and you have no way in, but you have support, right? Like you've got family that's like, you can do this, and you've got resources to learn, and you've got like, so I feel very, very blessed to be there instead of on the other end of that spectrum, which is like, you know, people telling you can't do it, you know, not having the resources or any connections to be able, like, not having the education, you know, that we've been able to have, you know. So it was a perfect storm, if you will, concoction, if you will, of support and resources in a time where, I mean, we were scraping, you know, we had loans on 2 cars, loan on a house, loan on, like, for me and Julie, you know, but it is, so it was like, it was a risk to jump in, but like, it wasn't as big of a barrier or a risk maybe as like it is for a lot of people, you know, a lot of people don't have the positive support system that we have. So
exactly. I like how you put it, how there's like a spectrum, right? And some people have like all the support, all the money, all the resources, and some people have none. It's a lot harder, and like wherever you are, you just kind of have to figure out like, all right, which path do I take now?
Yeah. If you're on that end of the spectrum where you don't have the support and you don't have people around you, like the first thing to do is to get yourself into a position of like, you know, relationships with people that give you that support, that provide that encouragement, you know, and it's there. It's hard to find, but it's there. You can find it. And, you know, getting a 9-to-5 job that's paying your bills so that you're not financially at risk, like that's another, you know, piece of the puzzle to get to where you can actually use that as a jumping off point to take the massive risk of entrepreneurship, you know.
The other thing that I don't know that it's been described anywhere, maybe it has in some psychology book or something, but there's almost like you can't just, or at least in my experience, like you can't just go into entrepreneurship. It's almost like your brain has to change in a certain way. And like totally. For me, like the way you think, like the way, like I don't even know what words to use, but it's almost like from the time I met you, 2009 till about 2016. So like that during that 5-year period, it was like my brain was like slowly like changing and churning, and it's like it's not something that can happen overnight even, right? It's like it takes a long time, or at least for me it did. I think one of the most influential books that like shifted my brain the most, that I didn't read, but I read through you.
Right. that happens a lot.
Was when you read the 4-Hour Work Week, I think, like all the concepts in there about like leverage and like, you know, just that whole thing. I was like, oh wow, like that was another shift. But it was like a bunch of those little shifts that culminated into kind of what happened, you know, in 2016, which we haven't gotten to yet. My so that's the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. Strong recommendation. If you're watching this and you have not read it, read it. It will change your life. What got me into that book was Stephen Key. He wrote a book called One Simple Idea, and reading that at the time was like, what? But now it would be like, that's so trivial. It's so basic, you know, but like at the time it was so revolutionary. And it was this idea that you, instead of trading your time for money, you can trade value for money. And it was like, what do you mean? You know, cause I was sitting there at my job, like, you know, on making phone calls and tethered to my desk, you know, hunched over, tired, eating. Well, for people candy. Listening, why don't you expand on that just a little bit? Like, I know you can't like summarize the whole book in just a few seconds, but like, do your best. Like, what do you mean value for money?
So value for money would be like a license opportunity. So like you create a product, then you license it out to a company, and they're now essentially saying, this is a really valuable thing. We're going to pay you a royalty
Mhm.
for letting us use this product that you've patented, basically. So like you come up with the idea, first to file now, that's changed since I read the book, but like you file your patent, it's like $100 for a provisional patent if I'm still up to date on the numbers. But like you file for that provisional patent, then now you're the person who owns that value. And so a
Mhm.
company will pay you, 5-year, 10-year in perpetuity, which means forever royalties, like let's say, in the 5 to 7% range on gross sales for that for the sales of that product. And so Stephen Key did his example was like they had these like toy basketball hoops, and he thought, what if I made it Michael Jordan instead of just a backboard? Because kids love Michael
Yeah.
Jordan. And so he like did his whole, montage in the book of like, I took it, got the cardboard and got a picture of Michael Jordan and cut it out and this and that. And then he patents it. And then he's, I think Tyco, I don't know. There's a toy company that basically he made over $100,000
Wow.
just like in like hardly any work, right? Like literally just
Yeah.
like had this idea, put together a prototype, paid for the patent, and then
Yeah.
6 figures, and so
Yeah.
from there he was addicted. He started just patenting all kinds of cool stuff. So like that's an example of like creating value that's not really tied to your time, but that someone
Yeah.
else gives you money for. And so there's, it's like having a good idea is not worth much, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So we were good at having ideas at the time.
Yeah.
But then what he did is he unlocked for me, which ironic that his last name is Key. He, un- he unlocked for me this idea that like that the missing piece, right? Where it was like
Yeah.
taking that idea and converting it into a thing that someone actually gives you money for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so from there it was like, oh, and so then like I saw the world in a different way,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so like you build a business, you can sell that business and you're getting multi-year multiples on the gross revenue of your company, like you make $1 million in a year and they say, well, you're getting a 5x multiple because of the type of business, plus the equity and all the assets you own, like vans or cars or houses or whatever it is that you own. And so some company gives you $10 million for this company you just like started 12 months ago, you made $1 million and now you're getting 10 million. That's a
Wow.
disproportionate amount of
Wow.
money for the amount of time you put in, right?
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
that idea that like I can create value that
Yeah.
far supersedes anything I could trade my time for. And so
Wow.
from there it was
Wow.
just like a bunch of books and studying and
Yeah. Yeah.
then that's what led to software, because software, you don't have a lot of overhead, you can make stuff yourself,
Yeah.
etc. So
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. It's huge. And you don't really even realize the mind shift until you talk to somebody who hasn't been through that. And you're like, oh, you don't see the light,
right, it's hard to explain. Like you
Yeah.
just kind of have to like have an aha moment that you can't really control.
Yeah.
Like it just needs to be like, oh, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So this is a nice segue into what did you do to get your first paying job or contract in tech? And give the whole story, because there's a really fun piece that has to do with this YouTube channel. So I'd love to hear what you're comfortable sharing about, like how you got into where you were actually getting paid to make stuff.
Yeah, so this YouTube channel, I would say, is very pivotal in the story. There's a lot of places where this YouTube channel really helped. So I always had a YouTube channel. I think most people do. Just when you sign up for Google, you get a YouTube account, you upload your family vacation or whatever, right? So that was my YouTube channel originally, from like years and years ago. It's just like, hey, like, my kids did a play, or, there's something random I'm posting, but it wasn't never like a channel. Like I wasn't an influencer or like a content creator or anything. But just to give the genesis of when I started building a following on YouTube, I was super into the Microsoft Surface when it first came out. Like, I was just enamored by it. I was like, wow, like, what is this device? Like, this looks so good. And of course, that was the original Surface that everyone else absolutely hated. Like, it did not do well. It was a total flop.
So you were the one fan. That makes sense. I get it now. Okay.
So I posted a video called "Why I Love My Microsoft." So when you stand out like that, like, people are like, "Oh, somebody actually likes it. Why do they like
why
this?"
I love, with like all caps, the Microsoft Surface, and they're like, huh?
Yeah.
Gotta watch this.
So I think, like, looking back, I think Microsoft saw that. It's like, oh, like, something we can, like, share, right?
Let me interject. The irony is your whole thing was showing what it could do if you hacked it. So it wasn't even like what it could actually do. It was what you made it do as an engineer.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, here's everything you did not know it could do, you know? And I was just like tip after tip after tip. And that kind of, like, I remember I got like 100 views. I was like, oh, that's amazing. Like, and I was like, oh, if only I could get like 200 views. I was like, that's it. So I got 200 views like a few days later. I'm like, oh, what? Like, who is watching this? Like, that. Then at that point, I knew it's way more than just my friends and family who had previous to that. Like, that's who would watch, family vacations and stuff like that. Yeah. And then I was like, oh man, can you imagine if I could get like 1,000 views? Like, internally, I was just thinking like, wow. And then it reached 1,000. I'm like, all right, 10,000 views, and I'll never like ask for another view again.
Yeah.
That's one of those things, like, it's never like, I realized, like, you're never satisfied. You always want more than what you have,
Right. Yeah. Mr. Beast is talking about how he wants to get to 1 billion. You're like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, it never ends then. If that's the case, then it's insatiable.
So I caught the bug, the dopamine hit from all those likes are a real addiction. So I was like, hey, let me make another video. And so then it kind of like kept going, and I would respond to people in the comments. I would do more videos, and then the rest is history for the channel. Then I just started, pumping out a lot. So that YouTube channel. So I was still working during that time in the energy industry. You and I were still very much entrepreneurial, having our conversations. And it just so happened that this YouTube thing, it wasn't really intentional. Like, I had never sought out, like, I'm going to build a name for myself, or I'm going to build a YouTube channel with followers. Like, that was never my intention. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it just kind of like happened in the sweet spot, like almost like what you were saying, like the perfect, like, storm culmination.
Yeah.
And so that was 2013. 2014 was a great year of growth for the channel. And then 2015, by that time, I think Surface was still small. So I was the biggest fan on YouTube for Surface. So big enough for Microsoft to invite me out to their events, right? Like their launch parties and stuff like that. So I was invited to the launch of the Surface book in 2015. But it just so happened that during that event, they also did a sneak peek of the HoloLens. So that was before like anyone could get it or anything. And I saw it on stage, and I was like, oh, like, that is the tech that I really want to get to, like holograms and AR. Like, I was not in VR at all. Like, I guess VR was already a thing. My only experience with VR at that point was Google Cardboard. Which I was like a little bit interested in, but not really. I was just like, oh, this is a cool, like, $3 toy you could buy.
Well, and at that time, wasn't there already rumors about Magic Leap? Like, weren't we like, oh man, I can't wait to see this device, right? So like, but there was no peaks. Nobody knew anything about it yet. But there was like cinematic, like they were really overselling what it could do at the time.
They were showing like people in the audiences watching this whale jump out of the, the floor, the gym floor.
Splashing in the gym floor.
Yeah. There was somebody like holding their hand with like a little elephant in it. which you can totally do now, but it's not magical when you actually do it.
Yeah.
It's magical when you see a picture of it and you're like,
Yeah.
whoa. You know,
Well,
so,
then
yeah,
you have to look right at it in order to be able to see it because the frame is like.
Yeah. So yeah, so even before the HoloLens came out, you and I were already talking about Magic Leap and about like, can you imagine like, you know, seeing something on a table and not knowing whether it's real or not, you know?
Yeah, we were coming up with app ideas before it was even announced, before we knew what the first device would ever look like even.
Yeah. So in a wonderful twist, the guy that I was in contact with at Microsoft, his name was Matt Zeller. He who like invited me out to these Surface events and stuff like that. He changed his job and went to work on the HoloLens team. And so
nice.
I was like, hey, like I did not get to try out the HoloLens. Like I tried, they actually had like a little room that you could go, you know, try it out, but the line was super long. And I didn't like, I stood in it, but I didn't get in because the time ran out and I just didn't make it. So I asked the guy, I'm like, hey, like, is there any way that I can like try this device out? Like, I need to see this. This is, you know, amazing. And so they were doing like a road show in October in Seattle. He's like, well, it's a developer roadshow. You're not a developer, which I wasn't. I was not a programmer. I was not an app creator. I wasn't a developer. I didn't know any, like that wasn't who I was, right? Back then. And he's like, but I'll squeeze you into this developer roadshow. And I'm like, thank you. So I remember I got off work. I was working in downtown Seattle, got off work early, rode my bike, up to where they were doing the roadshow thing and, went in. It was like this really dark room and I got to try it out and my mind was blown because up until that point, I was a little skeptical. I'm like, is this real or is it a gimmick? Right? Like, does it actually work? Like, can you actually see holograms or is it like something weird? Because prior to that, I tried Google Glass and I was not impressed with Google Glass at all. I'm like, that's just a screen. Like, I don't know. It didn't impress me as much. But when I saw the HoloLens in that room, I was like, whoa. Like, I shook my head and I like walked around it and I could see it. But he's like, no videos allowed, no pictures allowed. So I ran home after that and created a YouTube video with the best terrible VFX that I could come up with. It's still actually on my YouTube channel to this day. And I tried to simulate the field of view and I had like alligators and stuff like it. And I'm like, guys, I tried the HoloLens. This is what it roughly looks like in a really terrible way.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So yeah. I guess there's a lot more to the story, but I'll pause there. And yeah, that's kind of like the culmination of a couple different things like colliding, you know?
Well, and then you were one of was it 50 people that got invited to buy one? Yeah.
So right after that, I signed up. They said you had to be a developer for you to be considered, which I definitely was not.
I think you had started working on Random Ruby for the Surface.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
So you started
something with
so you started stuff. Random Ruby first. You're like, you read this book, right? About like making apps, right?
Yeah. App Empire. I recommend a lot of books. I don't really recommend that book. It's not that great, but it changed my life forever. So
but you did like, what was it? Like Pickup Pal and
Build a Disk.
One.
Build a Disk. We come up with like pickup lines and insults. It was an insult generator, and it was a learning experience.
Yeah. And then Random Ruby I loved. Like that one was amazing. It looked great. Like it was actually a really solid app, you know?
Yeah, it was just invisible. That was one of the really big learning one of the big lessons that I learned was just that like you kind of got to either like know a guy who knows a guy or, you know, have a lucky moment where something pops. Like once, because that was like 2015, 2014, I think, you know, and so it was just too little, too late in a way. You know, the App Store had already popped and there was already just like so many that it was hard to get.
And you
seen.
outsource development for that, right? Like you found somebody on Freelancer and went through that whole process, that learning process.
Yeah. The build edition pickup pal was ridiculous. I paid like 10 grand for like trash. And then Random Ruby. So like I did all the concept, I did all the because they were puzzles. Random Ruby was puzzles and stuff. So I designed the whole thing, wireframed the whole thing, drew mock-ups with because I didn't know graphic design yet at the time, and hired somebody for that. And so like by the end of it, I was 10, 12, something like that, $1,000 in the hole on these 3 apps, and was like, I gotta learn how to code myself. So that's when I learned how to, that's when I basically, that was the beginning of my story as far as tech goes, was like doing that, hiring out, and then being like, I got to do it myself. And
So then when I saw Random Ruby, I was like, yes, and then seeing the Surface, and there was no apps for the Surface. I'm like, this would be perfect for the Surface. I'm in contact with people at Microsoft, so, they'll be able to share it. And they're like, yeah, if you build it, we'll share it, which they never actually did. So
I know they actually dangled that. They were like, we will put it on our app, and you're like, oh, yeah.
So I invested. So I think you connected me with the freelancers and the artists, and so I was like, I'm not a coder or developer, so at that time I was like, yeah, I'll hire them. So I paid them and invested in that, and they built the app that was compatible. Like they ported your app over to work on the Surface in the Windows Store at the time. So got it all uploaded, and I emailed Microsoft. I'm like, hey, it's on the store now. Like you can share it, and just crickets at that point.
Yeah, you're like, where'd they go?
But I did use that, even though it never really went anywhere. But I did use that as being like, hey, I am a developer. See what I made.
Yeah.
Like I was the leader of this dev team. I was the engineering manager. Basically inflating whatever. I mean,
it's technically true.
Technically true, kind of weird way,
Yeah.
But I was like, I'm already familiar with the Microsoft ecosystem. I've published things to the Windows Store, which the HoloLens is. So I was like, on paper, it looked fantastic, right? Here's this guy who already made a Microsoft app, and it looks great, and it works, and so I submitted that with my request, and sure enough, I got the notification a few weeks later that you've been invited to purchase HoloLens in Wave 1. You've got 10 days to make your decision.
I remember you reaching out and being like, dude, it's $3,000. What am I don't have that. Yeah. I don't have the cash just sitting around. I'm like, you got to put it on a credit card. Don't tell Nisha I said this, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. So
put it on a credit card, dude. This is like once in a lifetime opportunity.
All right. So we got the Levi mind shift part, right? And then the Levi Random Ruby part, and then the YouTube that was happening around that time. The other big thing that happened was in February 2016, I got laid off from my job. Right.
Right.
So that was another huge catalyst. By that point, so the reason why I mentioned that here is because it was shortly after that I got the invitation to buy the HoloLens. So you just got laid off. How are you going to explain to your wife that you now need to spend $3,000 on this thing that doesn't really exist? And how are you going to but we'll get to that part in just a little bit. But yeah, so all of these different culminations.
Again, support. The support you need in your life to be able to be successful. You might not have had somebody handing it to you, but you had the support.
Yeah. So prior to that, I think the second half of 2015, I was already at that point, my mind had been shifted quite a bit. I got the entrepreneurial bug. I was basically did not want to trade time for money anymore. Right. At that stage, I was I need to do a startup. I need to do a business. I need I was feeling the urgency. Right. Yeah. But you can't really if you have a full-time career, you can't do that and a completely different startup in a completely different industry. You could try, but if you didn't have a family, it might work.
Right.
But if you've got a wife and kids, at that time,
the wife doesn't want to sleep under the desk. That's not. That's not a thing wives want to do. So
yeah. So I think realizing like even in the stuff that you and I were trying to do, right? In like 2014, 2015, I was like, I don't have the time that I need to like invest in this and like go all in, which I think if you're doing entrepreneurship, you'll realize like it requires a lot of sacrifice, right? Like a ton of risk, ton of time, ton of sacrifice. So when I got the notice that I was part of like 30% of the company that was getting laid off, which the company was only 30 people, so it was like 10 of us. When I got that notification, I was actually like super happy, like very mixed feelings, but I would say like 70% super excited because I'm like, yes, like this is my chance. Like this is my window. Like if I can't do it in this window, then chances are slim. Because if I have to go back and get full-time work, like I'll never get on the entrepreneurial train, right?
Right. Well, because we were in the gorge on a hike and talking about whether or not you wanted to quit. We were talking about like, should you take the leap? Should you not? Here's the pros and cons. Like what, having like, 'cause we were talking about making that jump. Yeah. And it was just like,
you had already made the jump.
On that. Yeah. So, cause real estate, we bought a house at like in 2010 and like, that was just like the perfect time to buy your first house. Just, it happened to be at the very, very bottom of the, the mortgage thing and the crisis and the recession and all that. So like in 3 years, our house went from like 140 and we ended up selling it for 260. Yeah. So we were able to pay off all of our debt. We moved to Thailand for 3 months.
Which was epic.
Which is
I was
epic.
Super jealous. I was like, oh.
Right. And we did take a detour. We went to Kenya for a 9-day safari. Julie learned real estate, got her license, and I learned, that was when I really dove into like graphic
That was like your
design
entrepreneurial boot camp time, right?
Totally.
Like
yeah.
Diving deep, like all in, right?
Yep, absolutely. And so then when we came home, we started our businesses and we were off to the races. But that leap, that jump was because of us, what we were able to do with that house. It just happened to be when we started, but it's like you have to have the opportunity, but you also have to sort of be ready for that opportunity. And so that's where that perfect storm comes into play, because I had the mindset, we wanted to make that happen. We wanted to jump off and go down that entrepreneurial path. And then so when that financial windfall came with that house, in hindsight, we would have kept the house, took out a home equity line of credit, and we'd have like $400,000 in equity right now, and we'd be making like $3,000 a month in cash flow. So, I wouldn't even do it the same way now that I know how things work. But that was, before we knew how things worked.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So anyways, so we had made that jump. And so we were talking with you about, I was talking with you about like, pros and cons of you making the jump, because it was like the grass. I'm like, dude, the grass is greener. It is so much greener, So then the layoff, was what I think you were like, decision made for me. That was why it was a relief. I think, right?
Because I don't think I could have made that decision on my own. Like consciously being like, all right, I'm going to put myself in a very like painful spot and like ripping out the safety net, ripping out the comfort of having like a steady job. Like, I think that would have been way too scary of a decision for me. And I think most people, I think if you don't have a family, it's a completely different decision. It's still scary. It's still tough, but I think you can take more risks, right?
Yeah. We didn't have kids yet. We didn't have kids at that time. And, you had 2, I think, at that point. It's a very different mindset once you have kids. 100% different. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and like you said, the opportunity, like being there for the opportunity, like I could have never engineered that I would get laid off at that exact time that this groundbreaking tech was released, that I got invited, because to buy it a few months or a few weeks later, right? Because I had made this app with you and like all of these things, you just can't engineer it. You just can't predict. You don't know when stuff's going to drop, when, So you just kind of have to be like there for the ride and ready for the opportunity, right? And to pull the trigger when the time comes.
Yeah, and the other thing that primed your mental like preparedness, if you will, to be ready with that mindset was when we missed the boat on App Store apps.
Yeah.
We talked about we have to be at the edge. And that's why I like calling it edge tech. We were like, we weren't at the edge of tech. We were like, we're laggards. We're behind where that edge is.
Yeah.
And we made that decision in like 2014. We're going to be at the edge of tech, period. Like we will get there. And so like we were doing our day jobs, but we were both very mentally focused on getting to the edge of tech.
Yeah.
And so
100%.
you were at that edge ready to go. You know, there was a preparedness there that was because of years of preparing your mind for that moment to be ready to see an opportunity, be like, that's it, that's the edge, you know?
Yep, exactly. So, so I remember, and, you know, I told, you know, my wife, I'm like, hey, there's this device, it's cost $3,000. Well, you know, of course, we're laid off at the time trying to figure out, you know, and she's like, okay, like, do it, you know, like, let's do it, you know.
Epic. So cool.
So that was great. Like you said, support system is key. At the time, in my mind, like the way I justified it was like I had plan A, B, and C, none of which actually panned out.
Right.
Plan A was like, I'm going to make like a bunch of YouTube videos about this device, right? And it's going to like, you know, I'm going to be one of the few, and everyone's going to watch it. It's going to be like Surface, but on steroids kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
The plan B was, I'm going to learn how to make apps for this and put it on the App Store, and millions of people are going to be downloading these games, and it's going to be awesome because everyone's going to be wearing these on their heads.
Right.
That was plan B. Plan C was like, well, worst case scenario, I can just like sell it and make a quick profit, and I didn't lose any money, right? Right. So like in my mind, I'm like, all right, those are my three options. Worst case scenario, I can still make my money back and make a profit because you can't just buy these on the shelves. You have to be invited to buy them. So sure. So pulled the trigger. And
I think that third one was like technically not allowed.
So found out after I bought it, then we found out that plan C was off the table.
Can't sell it. Darn it. You know?
Yeah. Plan A would have only worked if millions of people actually bought the device.
Right.
Which
so nobody knows about it, so it's not viral, you know?
Yeah. I remember I did later on, this is another part of the story, but later on finally did get to the point where I made a small app for it, posted it to the store, and got like 12 downloads after a few months. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
It's because nobody's there to buy it, you know? Those 12 people are probably all from Microsoft, you know, in the Hololens team or something.
Right.
So, and then, there was, so I guess this is where it kind of goes back to your original questions, like when do I draw that line? Like, when's the first thing that I made that I like sold or made money on? And that was, I would say, my very first HoloLens contract, which didn't happen until the end of 2016 and early 2017. It was for a company in Dubai. Actually, which was the first one? There may have been one right before that. The company in Shanghai. But yeah,
was the recycling app? I think the recycling app was either your first or second.
Did
you do one without me? Because I came in for the recycling app. That was the first one that I came in.
Yeah, so there's one right before that. There was like a city planning app. I think that city planning app happened very close to this. Actually, yeah, I'm trying to think now. It's been so long. But yes, I did. I got a message. I was on the Microsoft forums and asking questions and stuff. And I saw somebody say, hey, is there anyone available to make an app? We're a company based in Shanghai. We're wanting to make a city planning app. And at that point, I had already made my first app, which was this door that opens up and you walk into it and you're in a different world.
Portal.
the
Yeah.
portal. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I'm an app developer. I totally, that app, by the way, it took me like a month to make. And it's something that like, Levi, you could probably make it in like 2 hours today.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I sent them my portfolio. I'm like, yeah, I've got the Hololens, blah blah blah. So that was one of my very first contracts. It was around that time, being one of the few Hololens developers. You kind of, whether you were good or bad didn't matter. You had a corner on the market, right? I had no idea.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't even Plan C. Like I didn't even know about agency work or anything like that. You know, like
Right.
that. It was more like I was responding to things. I never sought those out. But having the YouTube channel helped a ton. This is where YouTube comes back in, because I would post whenever I'd make a little like a demo app or anything or any HoloLens related video. I would post that to YouTube, and it was very discoverable because I was already quite discoverable with the Surface. Anything else I posted was also discoverable. So when somebody searched for a HoloLens app developer, anything like that, one of my videos would always pop up.
Yep.
And then they would contact me that way. So that was like the beginning of that agency work journey, which, on the tail end of.
Right. So the HoloLens piece, like having this transition at Microsoft, has been a really deep, like emotionally taxing transition, because it's kind of where it started. Like we did apps, we did, but like the big break, like we're talking years of sacrifice, thousands and thousands of dollars invested.
Yep.
For nothing. And then boom, the HoloLens is our break. Right? Yep. That's when we actually had opportunity to like do things that were beyond the edge of tech. Like that, where we wanted to get to the edge, and it was like, we did it, we're at the edge, And so obviously not everything can succeed at the edge, you know. And it's been such a crazy run. It's like 6 years of that, being a really key part of like a lot of what we are doing. So it's been a challenging, sad send off. It feels like losing a friend, in a lot of ways.
No, I would say that's very true. I think if nothing else, for the nostalgia of it, right? It's almost like, hey, like this is what brought me into tech legitimately, right? Brought us into tech in a sense, and for that original one to kind of like fade away. And we're now on to other things in tech. But like, there's almost like that sad, like nostalgic, like, oh, like the original thing is gone kind of thing, That's definitely an important clarifier. Cause like I've said, I think I said in the last episode or the one before that, it's like, I rarely ever have, I'm not pulling it out anymore. It's not really been relevant for a bit, the Quest Pro 2 or the Quest 2, has been, a really key piece. And then some of the other headsets we've been using with like HTC and some other things too. Like it's just the industry is putting more money towards VR and multi-platform stuff, and so it's sort of shifted its way into more of like, until there's a good application for it, a handheld is fine for AR. What you need it for, a handheld can accomplish, until you need your hands for something. Definitely.
So that's a good segue maybe to like the last few questions that I have for you. And I know we're running out of time here. But like,
we're almost at an hour now.
We'll go through them really quick. Let's see. Fake it till you make it. That's one of the questions I had. So, you are you faking it? So you learn developing. Right, you learn programming, you learn how to, like, a lot of it's IDEs and like dragging and dropping, and maybe not as much coding, but like you make your first app and it's on the store. Are you the real deal at that time? Are you faking it? You get to where you have the HoloLens and you've got videos and you're showing it on YouTube, but like you've never really been hired by anybody. Are you an imposter still? right? If you get hired by somebody and they're paying you for the first time and you're like, I'm getting money for this. This is weird, right? Like, surely at that time you're still feeling, am I an imposter, right?
Yeah.
Like, where did you have that moment in the last however many years? Where was the moment where you were like, I'm a developer, or I'm an entrepreneur, or like where you could, at a family party, you could answer it with confidence that like, I'm no longer faking it. I am actually this, right? Like, I'm just curious to know, because that's like every developer ever has this imposter syndrome. And so, where did that end, or is it still going?
I would say it's still going. I can't speak to everyone, but I wouldn't be surprised if everyone always had a degree of imposter syndrome, right? I think there's a reason why that word is coined. I would say that I don't know that I could draw a line, but if I could, it would come back to, again, something that you said, which was that we were like, this was years ago, and you had listened to a podcast, and there was somebody who said there are no experts in AR and VR, right? And so, like,
I think that was a podcast. Tim Ferriss and Mark Andreessen. I think it was a conversation between them. Great. I remember that. Yeah.
So that made me think, like at first I was like, no, right? Like, but when I looked, I'm like, well, let me see if I can find the experts, and I was like, I can't actually find them. Like, there's a lot of people in the industry, but when you like dig into like what they've actually done, it's like, well, I mean, I've done that too, and Levi's done that too. So maybe we are the experts. So I almost wonder if imposter syndrome starts to go away when you realize after looking around that, oh wow, like, you are kind of like near the top. Even though like it doesn't seem like much, and it probably isn't, but relative to like what's around you, you're like, hey, well, I guess I'm the expert, which is kind of sad.
So it's a seniority thing almost, right? Like, not necessarily tenure, but experience type seniority.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if you go to the jungle and you start a society from scratch, and you're the only one who can build like a tent made out of leaves, you're like the master builder,
Right.
And it's like
exactly.
So yeah, I think it's a little bit of that. So I think there's always a little bit of imposter syndrome, but at some point you just kind of roll with it. I don't know where I would draw the line, but I think that moment would probably be the first line. And then the other lines is probably like when I started getting contracts with Microsoft and with Meta, and you're, hosting, like teaching sessions and stuff like that. Then you're like, okay, well, must be starting to get real now,
Yeah. Do you remember specifically anything where you felt like, okay, this is like, was there any moment, or is it just something that just sort of like, you don't think about it for a while, and then all of a sudden you just don't really think about it anymore?
So I would say, like, in my mind, like if I'm being honest, I would say, like, in my mind, I would say I still haven't made it yet. Like, we've been doing a lot, right? But I would say I'm waiting for that moment where there's not always like a cliff, like a few weeks out or a few months out, right?
That moment doesn't come. That's called retirement.
But like having that like always on the horizons, like you're always having to hustle, you're always having to like, get ahead of that. So in my mind, it feels like once that's no longer there, then maybe I'd feel like, all right, yeah, this is great,
Right. Totally.
Or like having like a runaway success product, right?
Right.
Or service or whatever it might be. Like it still feels like going back to what you were saying about like trading time for money or value for money. It still feels to a degree like I'm wrestling like time for money, right? Like it's like there's a lot of like, I don't know how to describe it, but haven't had that like that experience of like, oh man, there's like more orders coming in than I can fulfill, or there's oh wow, this product or this service has gone viral like in a big way. Like I don't feel like that's happened yet, or if that will ever happen, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of like what I'm waiting for. And everything before that is like, all right, like maybe I'm kind of like a little expert in this one area, but in my mind, it doesn't really count for much.
Right. Yeah, no, I get it. I think that for me, like it's been more of a like if there's a game of tech bingo, maybe, right? Like you've got like have you built something? Have you deployed it to an app store? Have you been a CEO? Have you hired people? Have you fired people? Have you pitched an investor? Have you raised startup capital? Have you raised a second round? Have you exited? Like you've got like there's like this spectrum, if you will, of entrepreneurship. It doesn't have to be in tech. Like you could do almost all of those things in healthcare. You could do it in construction. Yeah. Like so a lot of it, I think, what I didn't really understand at the very beginning, I'm starting to understand more. And that's like, it has less to do with the actual tech you're making or using and a whole lot more to do with building businesses. Yeah. Like it's a business, even if you're a solo developer, your bingo card is like still a business, like of all these things, right? Like, are you a co-founder? Do you have equity in a company? Are you, if it's restricted options, if it's not, like, understanding the difference, like all of those things just sort of like slowly come. And so like there's expertise in a field like AR or in a field like VR, spatial, covering both all the way up to like the, and then you've got metaverse and you've got edge tech and you've got all of this in our space. Right. But like, for me, the imposter syndrome piece really started fading once I had like enough of those bingo squares covered. Yeah. And then it was like, okay, like I have a full picture now. Yeah. Of what it takes in each stage, and that does only come with time. It does only come with experience. And, some of it is luck and some of it is working really, really, really hard to be ready when the opportunity's there to get lucky, right? Like the harder I work, the luckier I get. I can't remember who said that, but it was Edison or Jefferson or somebody. I like that one, actually. It's a good one. The harder I work, the luckier I get. And, from a personal perspective, like for me, a big part of it too is faith. Like there's a similar saying that I really like, and that's, I pray that God will bless the work of my hands, and then I work as hard as I can. It's that same kind of a thing, where it's like you sort of, I've got years and years and years, decades of an experience with faith that sort of like can believe in a thing that I don't see yet. And so like I find that with imposter syndrome, taking that pattern or taking that formula or taking that precedent that's been set in my life, taking the experience of placing faith in something, I find that like I get more value and I'm able to provide more value, I think is even a better way to phrase that. If I don't approach it with fear or anxiety or I'm an imposter, what do I do? Like coming in with confidence, that the confidence that you choose to have by having faith in, like, I can do this. I'm good. I have the experience. I can figure it out, getting comfortable learning and knowing that like, oh, I just have to learn how to learn. Now that I know how to learn, there's trust. I learned that from you big time. You've always been really, really good at saying, yes, that's possible because I know that these things are possible. Right. Whereas for me, it's like, yeah, but it's not done yet. So it's not possible. Like I'm very binary in my thinking. So I was curious to ask that question because I've been inspired by your ability to live into something that doesn't exist yet in a confident way. It's really inspirational. It's helped me a lot in like taking some of the risks that maybe I wouldn't have taken before because I can't see how it ends. I like to know, like, these are the 10 ways that it could end before I would jump in.
Yeah.
You know? And so, like, imposter syndrome for me came a lot from like the fear of like not really knowing what I didn't know. And so I've had a lot of progress, if you will, in the last few years, even of like, you know, being able to have faith in myself, you know, and I find that really helps the imposter part sort of fade away. The more you believe that, like, I can figure this out, you know?
Yeah. No, that's definitely key. And, you know, somebody was asking me, like, what is the secret to success? And I told them, well, first of all, don't ask me yet, because but you know, I told, like, is it like hard work? Is it persistence? And I was like, is it? And they like listed off this stuff. I'm like, well, like, all of those things are necessary ingredients, but none of them are like the thing. Like, you can't engineer success, like force it to happen, but you can prepare yourself to like seize the opportunity when it comes.
Right.
But at the end of the day, there is an element of risk, right? You know, and I would say that's the biggest ingredient. Like, yes, hard work is necessary. Persistence is necessary. You know, all of these things are necessary. But the biggest ingredient is probably like risk, right? And the reason for that is kind of like what you were saying earlier, is like, you got to be ready for when that opportunity comes, because you don't know when it's going to come, right?
Right.
And got to have like the faith, right? to know, like, you know.
Have the faith.
If you could engineer
in yourself, that you can figure it out, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you could engineer it to happen like with 100% certainty, then like everyone would just do that, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's there is that risky element in there for sure.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So last question.
The AI question is?
Yeah, I'm going to skip one.
Okay.
I feel like it would have been a good segue, but I think we're running really low on time.
Yeah.
We're over the hour. So the AI question. What's the best question to ask a podcast guest to close the show? ChatGPT says, a great question to ask a podcast guest to close the show is, what advice would you give to someone who wants to follow in your footsteps? This allows the guest to share their wisdom and experience with the audience, and can be a great source of inspiration and motivation for listeners who are interested in pursuing a similar path. So can you inspire us with your wisdom and experience?
So I would say get a friend like Levi.
The secret.
No, but I think like during this entire podcast, I think we pretty much have been answering that like the whole time, right? It's been our stories and, you know, books to read and just mind shifts and being there for the right opportunity. Like, I think that's a great question, because it kind of culminates everything that we've talked about over the last hour, right?
Right.
But yeah, I would say for me that summarizes it. Kind of a cop-out answer.
Yeah, I think that, like, in my mind, it distills all the way down to mindset.
Yeah.
You know, like it's really about how you think about things, because that's what you notice. That, like, if you're going to go shopping for a car and you're like, I want to buy a Mini Cooper, and you're looking around, you're like, whoa, there's so many Mini Coopers around. Yeah. You know, everybody has one, but like, you know, it's common knowledge that, like, you know, those types of things you don't notice the Mini Cooper if you're not thinking about the Mini Cooper, right? So it's like what you make yourself aware of, what you're focusing your mind on. If you want to, you know, be closer to God, you're more mindful about gratitude and thankfulness. You know, being like, I see a thing, it's making me anxious. I'm going to instead be thankful for the thing that's making me anxious because my worry means that I care about it. So let's be grateful for the parts of it that I care about, you know?
Yeah.
Or like,
Yeah.
if you're wanting to be, you know, good at a job, you're watching YouTube videos, you're studying it, you're thinking about it, you're talking to people about it. Like, I think that our attention, and what we're mindful of throughout the day, has a big impact on what we're, on our ability to take advantage of an opportunity, on our ability to love someone when they need it, on our ability
Yeah.
to serve someone in need and like notice their need in a meaningful
Mhm.
way. You know, like
Yeah.
it's what we fix our mind on, you know, and I think that
Yeah.
that's actually kind of a fun little bow on our conversation is like really where it's not the programming, it's not the YouTube video,
Yeah.
it's really been a story of what your attention has been on and what your mindset has been and how it's evolved into something where, you know, I mean, you've successfully raised capital in 2 companies. You've got a third one that's seeing really good revenue and about to turn a profit. You've got an agency that's, you know, I mean, you've made a lot of, you know,
Yeah.
successful projects and products that have seen, you know, surgery apps, like doctors using your apps in the surgery room. Like that's amazing, you know, and like, but like all of those things have sort of come from that very simple shift in like how you see the world and what you focus on, you know.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Well, thank you so much, Levi. And yeah, thank you everyone for watching. This was fun, and we'll catch you next time on the Tech Show episode 4.
Woo!